Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Believe it or not, we actually have a New York Giants victory. The first one in 11 games, the first one in 12 weeks, the first one of the season at home. We have a victory to talk about. And here to help me do that, as always on Monday morning, is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. Tony, I have a question. How do we do this? I don't remember. How do we do this?
Is it a celebration or is it a funeral?
I don't know, but
or is it a funeral
look, I'm gonna start with this. We're gonna hear about the Giants blowing up the tank for the next 5 months. If the Giants don't get a quarterback in the upcoming draft, we're going to hear about it long beyond that. And look, every Giants fan out there who's listening, every Giants fan out there who sees this show, every Giants fan who reads Big Blue View, this is Tony's fault. This is all Tony's fault. Tony missed the game on Sunday. He missed the game. He didn't see the game, and the Giants won. This is Tony's fault for missing the game. So if you're upset that they won, blame it on Tony. So Tony, this is on you if they don't get the quarterback that fans want. So it's all
I
you.
get it. I take full responsibility, but I also take responsibility for watching any of their games this season because under that theory they'd be the number one seed in the playoffs if only I didn't watch the game. So maybe I just should stop watching the
Giants. either that or you better never miss a game again. If the Giants want to get the number one pick, you better not miss the game this weekend. But hey, I wrote this morning, all kidding aside, I understand that there are fans who are upset about losing control of the number one pick, which the Giants still might get. They could end up with number one. They could end up with number 9. Who knows? But I get it. But for me, I have never, ever, ever felt like winning a football game or winning any sort of athletic competition. I've never felt like winning was a bad thing. That's what these players get paid to do. It's their livelihood. They're putting their bodies on the line. They're putting their careers on the line. These players don't care about where the Giants draft in April. They don't care because a lot of them aren't going to be Giants. Some of them might not have careers if they don't play well. Elijah Garcia, defensive tackle, recovered a fumble at the end of the game, and he was running up and down the sideline, high-fiving fans, along the line there. That may be the only fumble he ever recovers. He may not have an NFL career after this year. So I felt good for those players. I felt good when I walked in the locker room that it was a happy place. It was noisy. It wasn't sullen. People weren't bailing. They were enjoying, being around and being able to discuss a victory. And I don't know. I think there's always benefit to winning. The draft, for me, the draft takes care of itself. So just your thoughts on imploding the tank.
Yeah. So I didn't, even though I wasn't able to watch the game yesterday, I did have my phone by my side, and I was checking the scores now and then, and it's just it's such a strange feeling that you get when your team is in position to get the number one pick, and you see them winning what from a 2024 season standpoint is a meaningless victory to knock them out of the number one draft pick, and I'm just noticing the very mixed emotions I'm having while I'm watching that. But I mean, the other thing that I noticed though, while I at least had the game on the radio in the fourth quarter while I was driving home from the thing I was at yesterday, and as they're scoring these touchdowns in the fourth quarter to take a little bit of a commanding lead by the end of the game, it's like I'm still enjoying it, and so still at heart. I want them to win, but I recognize that it complicates the situation. So yeah, you live with the conflicting feelings. Uh, can I just point out two things to you? One that I thought about yesterday after this had happened is that the Giants, right, who had nothing but chaos at quarterback this year, have scored 260 points this season, and they'd lost 10 in a row before yesterday. The Chicago Bears, who did have the number one pick in the draft and selected what most people regarded, I think, as the best quarterback prospect in the country with that number one pick. They've lost 10 in a row. They've only scored 286 points, and their record at 4-12 is only one game better than the Giants. And so, you know, I think you have to remember that getting the number one draft pick is not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. You don't know whether you're going to pick the right guy, and there's still plenty of time for Caleb Williams to become the right guy. Okay, it's not like you judge him after one season, but it doesn't always work out the way things have worked out for Washington with Jaden Daniels. In fact, as often as not, it doesn't work out with the number one pick. There's a long line of number one picks who have not lived up to the selection. So as much as I personally like Cam Ward, I mean, I first noticed him when he was at Washington State, and I think he's someone who could really do well in the NFL. But as much as I like him, there's no guarantee of anything. The other thing is just a tweet that I saw yesterday that I just have to repeat. It's from Matt Harmon, who's an analyst who specializes in analyzing college and pro wide receivers. He's got a website, Reception Perception, that breaks down detailed routes and things like that. And so during the game yesterday, he tweeted, Malik Neighbors dominating the Colts so that his team can't draft a rookie quarterback high and is then forced to sign Jameis Winston in free agency, who will pummel him with enough targets that he clears 2,000 yards next season. So, uh,
It's
so
yeah, I
yes,
get it.
there, 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 there may be something at the end of the rainbow, right?
Tony, I get it, and I understand that the higher draft pick, the number one pick, means there's nobody standing in your way of getting the player that you want. I get that. Okay. Um, but how often have we seen, and you kind of talked about it, how often have we seen the number one pick not be the right pick? And I think, as you said, Caleb Williams could still wind up being a great quarterback. I think he's just in a horrible situation with the Bears right now. If they can get the situation around him right, then maybe we will see the Caleb Williams that the Bears thought they drafted. But right now, you would look at Jaden Daniels and Drake May and think that Caleb Williams is QB3, QB4 if you look at Bo Nix out of this draft class. If you look at the year before, I think the Carolina Panthers probably wish they had drafted CJ Stroud, although Bryce Young has played better. The point is, and I thought of this last night as I was writing my column for this morning at Big Blue View. When's the last time the New York Giants had the number 4 overall pick and needed a quarterback? The last time they had the number 4 overall pick and needed a quarterback was 2004. They drafted Phillip Rivers. They made a trade, sending Rivers and a bunch of other assets to the Chargers and got Eli Manning. That worked out pretty well. The last time the Giants were in a similar situation where the fan base was up in arms at the end of the 2019 season, clamoring for Chase Young. At the end of the 2019 season, the Giants beat Washington, lost the opportunity for the number 2 overall pick, which went to Washington, and they took Chase Young. The Giants had to, quote unquote, settle for the number 4 pick. And that turned into Andrew Thomas, who's the best offensive lineman the Giants have had since Chris Snee. And Chase Young is a journeyman defensive end at this point in his career. He's a decent player, but he's a journeyman defensive end. So the point being, the higher pick guarantees you nothing except an opportunity to make a bigger mistake. And the idea is get the pick right whenever you make it. And if you're really convicted on a guy, then and you have to give up assets to go get him, then you give up assets to go get him.
Yeah,
I don't know,
and
just
the thing about
your
those
thoughts on all
examples,
that.
and the thing about those examples you gave, right? You're not even relying on the team ahead of you to make a bad choice with the pick that they have, because if you look at those examples, all right, the Washington Commanders did not do the wrong thing in drafting Chase Young. Chase Young was the consensus best defensive player in that draft. Okay. And no one thought that it was unreasonable to be taking him number 2, right? I mean, they
Right.
could have taken a quarterback for themselves and solved their problem at quarterback long before, but still everybody was raving, right, over Chase Young. And you look at a lot of those cases that teams aren't making a bad pick based on what you know at the time. It just turns out not to be the right pick
Right.
in retrospect.
It's
Even going back with the Giants and Eli Manning, if the Giants were forced to spend the next 15, 20 years with Philip Rivers, would they have done any worse? Well, yeah, we'll never know. Philip
you
Rivers
never
turned out to
know.
be a pretty good quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
right? In
The
and that's the thing about it. It's just
the
so
number
uncertain.
3 pick, the number 3 in that 2020 draft, Tony, the number 3 pick was Jeff Okudah, cornerback who went to Detroit, who everybody thought was the next Darrelle Revis, the next shutdown
Mhm.
guy, and he has had a nothing NFL career. So yeah, as I wrote this morning, these guys don't always turn into what Mel Kiper and Daniel Jeremiah and all of the draft analysts tell you that they think they could be if they hit their ceiling. Yeah, Evan Neal, with
Yeah,
the Giants, Evan Neal, 95% of draft analysts. There are a handful who thought differently, because there always are a handful who run counter to the mainstream of opinion. But almost all draft analysts thought he was a stud, thought he was a top 10 pick, deserved to be a top 10 pick, and would be a stud in the NFL. And you can't say that picking him was the wrong choice, at number 7 a couple of years ago. It just didn't work out. He just hasn't been the
yeah,
player that everybody expected him to be. And that happens because this is an inexact science. There are no guarantees when you draft these players that they're what you think they are, that they're in the right situation, that they're with the right people, that they're what you thought they were when you watched them on film.
that's right. Yeah, and I mean, so many. I mean, here's a good question. How many number 1 picks have turned out to be great players? There's a long line of them that either haven't turned out to be great or didn't really get good until much later in their careers. I mean, you look at 2016, right? When the Rams took Jared Goff, and yes, Jared Goff got them to a Super Bowl several years later, but everyone agreed that he had relatively little to do with them getting them to the Super Bowl. That it was all Sean McVay offense that was designed to kind of hide Jared Goff's flaws, and Goff was considered something of a failure as a number one draft pick, so much so that the Rams happily traded him to Detroit to get Matthew Stafford, which worked out for them because they did get a Super Bowl ring with Matthew Stafford. But now Jared Goff, later in his career, is looking like one of the best quarterbacks in football. And so he's, in the right situation with the right offense, maybe whatever. He looks great. Mitchell Trubisky, number 2 pick, the first quarterback off the board in 2017, turned out not to make it. Right, had Patrick
Right.
Mahomes there that they could have had. Right, 2018. Right, you had Baker Mayfield, who's resurrected his career. God bless him. I mean, he's looking like a very good quarterback now. But the 2 best quarterbacks in that draft turned out to be taken at pick number 7 and pick number 32. And the reason the Ravens took him at number 32 was that they had the number 25 pick and they passed on him with the number 25 pick, then traded back into the first round to get him at number 32. So they didn't even think it was worth using the number 25 pick.
The Ravens, Tony, the Ravens did the one thing that we say you should never, ever, ever do when you want a quarterback, when you love a quarterback. They got cute. And it still worked.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's right, and it could have blown up in their faces, right? And and of course they had Joe Flacco, and Joe Flacco was still a very good quarterback at that time, and he's still not that bad. I mean, he didn't play poorly yesterday, from what I gathered, but you just cannot. And so if you think that Cam Ward is going to be great in the NFL, and if I had to pick one guy that I think maybe will turn out great from this class, then he's the guy I would pick. But you just don't know. And if you think Shedeur Sanders is going to be the guy, you just don't know.
No, you absolutely don't know. I look at Cam Ward, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about Cam Ward, and this person said to me that I think Cam Ward could be the next Steve McNair. And Steve McNair was a good quarterback in the NFL for a very long time. He was a guy that you could win with. But he could be Steve McNair. He could be some version of Josh Allen with the skill set that he's got. But he could also be Jameis Winston, because he's a gunslinger who makes a lot of mistakes as well. So you just don't know. At some point, you have to take the swing, but you just don't know. I mean, maybe the best quarterback in this class turns out to be Jackson Dart, or maybe it turns out to be Carson Beck, guys that are probably going to get drafted on day 2 in, 3rd round, 4th round, somewhere in there. Maybe it turns out to be one of those guys. We don't know until they get on the field and we actually see it. As I said, I felt good yesterday for the players. Okay. And I've done this long enough that I try to remove myself from rooting, from being really emotionally invested in the outcomes of these games. I find that I just can't do that, and do this job on a daily basis the way that I have to do it. But I will say that I do root for certain players. I do root for people. And I will say that when I walked into the locker room last night after the game, there was such a noticeable difference. It's been so quiet. It's been so sullen. Even during the week when you go to practice, guys who are usually at their lockers and willing to talk, they've been making themselves unavailable by hanging out and playing cards in the middle of the room where you can't disturb them. And it was so nice to walk in the room and see smiles and see happy guys and see Graham Gano running around with his kids in the locker room, and guys feeling good about each other and giving each other props and talking about, what other guys have put themselves through and the work that other guys have done. And it was cool to see how happy everybody was for Drew Lock, and how happy everybody was for Neighbors and for Tracy for setting the records that they set yesterday. And all of that. Even, even guys were happy Darius Slayton got a touchdown and Wan'Dale Robinson had a good day. And that was just cool. And Jermaine Illuminor talked about it. And one of the things he said was, when we talk about the value of winning a game, yeah, it's a meaningless game in terms of the standings, but it meant a lot to those players. And the other thing that he talked about was the Giants are such a young team. And he said, do you want to drop a first round quarterback into the middle of a young team that's already turned sour, into the middle of a young team that's already accepted losing? Do you want Malik Neighbors, who hates losing with a passion and has dragged himself to the field a lot of the time this year? Do you want him to begin to just accept his paycheck and be fine with losing? Do you want Tyrone Tracy not to care about winning and losing and not to work to get better at ball security? Do you want these guys, to just take their paychecks and go home? If that's what happens at some point when guys just get used to losing. And that's why, to me, winning is so important sometimes, because if you do the right things, it shows you that the results, that your work can lead to something.
Yeah, and it's not that was a meaningless game for their opponent yesterday, the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, they're far from a good team, right? But they were still in the hunt for a
Right.
playoff spot in their own division, and so that was a game they came into having to win and wanting to win for real playoff implications. And so it's not as if you've got two terrible teams playing out the string and it's which one can play worse. That Indianapolis was trying to win that game yesterday, and they're
It
not
didn't look
without
like it.
talent on that. It just didn't look like it the way they played, but so I mean they've got their own problems. Still, that's a team that was trying to get into the playoffs yesterday. And so I do think it means more when you're winning a game against a team that is at least trying to win the game. And it's and yeah, and as you say, I think players will play. So there's no incentive for players to tank, because if
Right.
you tank, you may be the guy who's not there next year, right? And
Right.
so you've always got to try to play your best, because you want to ensure your spot on the team. And you always wonder whether some guys will start mailing it in a bad situation. But I don't. And again, I'm not
And
inside the locker room. I'm not
what
inside
what
the
I
heads of
what I will say
players.
about that, Tony, quickly, what I will say about that is there are players who mail it in, and the players in the locker room know who those guys are. All right, they know who those guys are, and the head coach and the GM know who those guys are too. And those guys won't have jobs on that roster next year. So, so that's what it's about. These guys are playing for their jobs, and they're
Yeah.
playing to show people what they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it just has to be a natural. I mean, I have no idea of the thought process of a professional athlete, because I'm as far from that as you can get. But I have to imagine that none of them got to that point without having pride in what they do. And so yeah, I think the idea that you can go out on the field not give your best, when especially in a game like football, where not giving your best means you're going to get physically pummeled by the guy opposite you, in addition to being embarrassed in front of a big TV audience. Yeah, that has to factor into things. And I I think I have no idea what's going to happen with the coaching situation, but I think the other interesting thing to see with a bad team is whether the team is really giving up, whether it looks like they're giving up on the coaches or not. And somehow that team has managed to play hard, even though the results haven't always been good. And to me, that's a good thing to see for a team, regardless of what happens with the coaching situation next year. It's a good thing to see that things haven't gone that sour, that everyone is just rolling their eyes all the time at everything. And I get the impression there are a couple of other teams around the league that may be the case for.
No, it's interesting, Tony, because we talk about effort and all that, and we'll talk a little bit more about Brian Daboll here in a minute. But before we talk about Daboll, there is something else that I wanted to talk about in reference to yesterday. We have discussed, and I'm actually working on a piece about this for Big Blue View. We have discussed ad nauseum the Giants' need for a quarterback in the post Daniel Jones era. And now, if you want to take another positive spin on Sunday's game, the Giants put up 45 points. All right. They put up 45 points on what is not a great Indianapolis defense, but that's the first time they've scored in the 40s since the end of the 2019 season, when they scored 41 points in an overtime win against Washington. What that game showed yesterday, and Brian Daboll mentioned it a couple of times, and a couple of players mentioned it in giving props to Drew Lock, that game showed the difference that good quarterback play can make. Okay. And I mean, Drew Lock, he didn't make a whole lot of special throws yesterday, but he got protection. He got the ball out of his hands. He threw the ball accurately. He threw a fantastic back shoulder fade at one point to Malik Neighbors that set up a touchdown. But when you look at that, if you want something to hang your hat on, you can think, this is what it can look like. Now, Drew Lock's not the long-term answer. Drew Lock's career has been too volatile and too up and down. Maybe Drew Lock showed you that he could be, maybe if he can continue that, he can be the placeholder. He can be the bridge. He could be the number 2. I don't know how the Giants feel about him. But when you look at that game, you have to think, this is what it could look like if we do get the right quarterback with this organization. So I look at that and I think, I thought, wow, maybe there are enough pieces here for that quick turnaround if the Giants get the right guy. So whether they can or not, I don't know, but I took that as a positive from the game as well.
Yeah, and and the Giants actually, I mean, the last few weeks have been rough. The defense especially has had a tough time of it the last few weeks, giving up a lot of points. But defense is where so many of the injuries are on this team, and so maybe they get a little bit of a pass for that. But the the Giants hung in there for much of the season, even though they were losing all of these games. And the reason they were losing, though, is that the offense could never just kind of get over the hump and do what they needed to do when the game was there to be won. And as you say, you saw yesterday that and even yesterday, right? I mean, the Colts came back on them after the Giants built up an early lead. The Colts came back on them and were one successful 2-point conversion, I guess, away from tying the game. I think around the beginning of the fourth quarter or so. But the fact that they had an offense yesterday that was working enough so that they could then come back and score more points. First of all, that they could get that lead in the first place, but then they could come back and score more points to seal the game in the fourth quarter. Means so much, and that's something that they just have not had most of the season. I mean, we've been watching these games week after week after week, where you're just looking for that one drive that they can use to get themselves over the hump, right? And we watched the first Dallas game where the Cowboys were giving them chances, drive after drive after drive to win that game, and they just could not get into the end zone. When you looked at the Cincinnati game, where the Giants really kind of, in a sense, dominated that game, but their offense just could not ever get to the point where they were taking advantage of what Cincinnati was giving them. We've seen that over and over and over again this season. And as you say, you get good enough quarterback play, and there is talent on this Giants offense. And the offensive line is certainly not one of the best in the NFL, but they're not the dumpster fire that they were last year. They've got a tremendous wide receiver now in Neighbors. And, you want to talk about the draft philosophy of drafting best player available. Well, I think the Giants got the best player available at number 6, even, they didn't take one of the quarterbacks, but he's just amazing for a guy that, as you say, has been nursing injuries most of the season. And he's just amazing. At the catch point and with the ball in his hands. I mean, you watched those plays yesterday. You mentioned that one play where he went up on the back shoulder fade and made a tremendous catch. And I actually saw a picture of that, a still. And God, it looks like he's 5 feet in the air. I mean, he wasn't really, but he looks like he was 5 feet in the air to go up and get that ball. And you look at the 2 touchdowns. They were these short little passes that he just took the ball and he just sliced through that defense like butter to actually score those touchdowns. He's such a tremendously talented player, and it's not like the rest of the team is untalented either. As you said, Robinson played well, Slayton had a touchdown, Tracy played well and has played well all season. So they've got enough of the pieces on offense, and you put a good quarterback with that team, and I think he can have a fairly dramatic difference in a fairly short period of time.
And the other question we have to talk about, and in the comments, Ashtray411 says, "I'd fire Brian Daboll for winning this game." And all right, Ashtray, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. But we do have to talk about Brian Daboll. We do have to talk about his future, Joe Shane's future. I don't know that one victory, Tony, at the end of the season like this, honestly, that shouldn't, to me, change whatever decision John Mara and Steve Tisch are going to make. But I'm still at this point in time where I look at it and I think you either move on with a new GM and a new head coach, or you keep these 2 guys. And look, Joe Shane's made mistakes, but he's also not a dummy. He's a guy that's been in the NFL for a long time. He's made mistakes. I think he recognizes, a fair amount of the mistakes that he's made. I don't know if Brian Daboll in the end is going to be the right head coach or a quality NFL head coach. What I do know is that despite the fact that the offense has been awful most of the year, I think we saw that it can be better on Sunday. And Daboll does have the reputation, of being a guy that's worked successfully with quarterbacks in the past. So maybe they're the right tandem to get the next 2 years to see if they can find and develop a quarterback. I don't know what they're going to do. But I guess my question for you isn't necessarily do they stay or go, but does winning a game here like this change the calculus at all for you?
So I think it does a little bit for me, and of course, my opinion isn't what matters. It's the Giants owner's opinion that matters on this. I do have a sense that if you see the team spiraling downward and getting out of control at the end of the season, then you're really forced to make a change, because if that's happening, then you sense that the locker room has been poisoned by what's happened over the course of the season. And so if you see the team still playing hard and yesterday playing fairly well up to the end of the season, then you can at least take that concern off the board, that you're not forced into making a change by what looks like an irredeemable situation. whether you do make that changes anyway is a hard thing. I will say that I have come around to the view that if you make a change, you have to make a change at both GM and head coach, and you can't do one and not the other. The Bears are in the middle of doing just the opposite of that, right? I mean, I think Aberflus is probably out the door at the end of the season, but I don't know. But Ryan Poles may stay on, and they got rid of their offensive coordinator and changed and so on and so forth, and everything has just been, I think, a
Right.
mess
Yeah,
since
Eberflus is
the
already out the door, Tony. Eberflus is
is
already
he? I'm
out the
sorry, he's
door.
already out.
So
I'm
yeah.
sorry, he's already out.
Mm.
All right, Aberflus is already out the door. That's right. Um, and so they're going the opposite route, and well, maybe it will work out for them, but I don't know that it's the right way to do things in today's NFL, where it seems that you need a GM and a head coach who are on the same wavelength. And the Giants' recent past with the Gettleman Joe Judge era, I think, is an example of how that's probably not a great idea. So I at this point I think you can flip a coin as to whether they both stay or whether they're both gone. But I'm hoping that it's not Shane stays and Dable goes. Not because I like Shane more than Dable or anything like that, just because I don't think it's strategically a good idea to split up the GM and the head coach.
Yeah, the situation that you set up, and the one thing that I have thought is if John Mara and Steve Tisch really like the philosophy and the potential of Joe Shane, the only thing that I have thought is, what if Joe himself has come to the conclusion that as much as he and Brian Daboll are friends and they came in together, what if Joe has come to the conclusion that Brian just is not a head coach, that that he deserved the opportunity, but that he's not a head coach? Then maybe it changes a little bit, but I don't know that Joe is there. And the problem that you always set up is, you know, Daboll and Shane came in with 5-year contracts. They came in on the same track. They came in together. They came in joined at the hip. If you remove one and hire another, you set up guys who are on different timelines. Then you set up the possibility that if they don't necessarily see things eye to eye, because let's be real, in 2022, John Mara stepped back and he let Joe Shane hire the head coach that Joe Shane wanted. That's not generally how things work with the Giants. If Brian Daboll gets fired and Joe Shane stays, Joe Shane's not hiring the next head coach. John Mara and Steve Tisch are hiring the next head coach. Joe Shane's going to have to work with whoever they tell him to work with. And that, as you said, is the Gettleman Judge situation again, where you have guys on different tracks, different timelines. And if they don't mesh, then what you have is the head coach running to the owner and saying, I can't work with this GM because he won't give me the players that I want. Or you have the GM running to ownership and saying, I'm giving this guy what he says he wants, or I'm giving this guy, I'm giving this guy talent, and he's not doing a good job with it. And so you just set up a situation where there's such a potential for a divide that I would prefer keeping it. I would prefer keeping both guys on the same track. And as you
Yeah.
said, for
And
me, it's still a coin flip.
yeah, and I don't think that an owner should be the one choosing a head coach. Um, and I understand, the owner or owners are the ones putting up the money, and so yeah, they should have a say in things. But I like the situation much better in which the GM is making that decision, because from a football standpoint, you just, I think, have to trust uh, your GM more than you trust the owner. And I don't think a lot of good things can come from owners actually making that decision. I understand they have to be comfortable with the pick, but I don't think an owner should be overruling a GM or forcing a coach onto a GM, as I guess was the case when Joe Judge was hired. And so, and again, not that I had confidence in Dave Gettleman to make the right decision either, but still, ultimately, if you believe your GM is worth keeping in the position, then I think you should entrust that person with the responsibility to make the decision about the coach.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Tony. And we're headed for an interesting off season. There's only a one more game to go, and we'll see what happens here. But it's certainly going to be an interesting off season for the Giants. We'll find out what happens against the Eagles this weekend. We'll find out if that running back who used to be a Giant plays on Sunday, chases that rushing record. We'll find out about that here during the week, but and we'll find out if any planes fly over Lincoln Financial Field poking fun at the Giants, all that fun stuff. But it will certainly be an interesting offseason, and we've got one more game to break down, and we'll do that next Monday. So, folks, I hope everybody had a good Christmas. I hope everybody has a great New Year. And thank you, as always, for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.